like scary movies?
No, not really.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Anyway, I think you have the wrong number, so bye.
Don't hang up on me.
Man, that was weird. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Psych podcast where psychology meets film. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and today's episode is a little bit special because we are recording on the actual one year anniversary of the podcast, which I think is pretty cool. So this recording is special. I mean, the episode doesn't really match up with the 1 year anniversary, and we already did the 1 year retrospective in the last episode, but I think it's a little bit special, and it went out on social media this morning, and that was kind of fun. So, yeah, 1 year anniversary. Crazy, right? 1 year ago, the first episode went out. Cool. Today's episode, on the other hand, is continuing in the proud tradition of the podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about a fantastic entry, and I think a reimagining somewhat of the horror slasher genre flick kind of movie. And so today, we're going to be talking about Wes Craven's Scream. Wes Craven's Scream. A lovely little homage and fostering of the new, an homage to the old and a fostering of the new idea regarding a meta look at the old slasher films. It's great. I love it. The film stars Neve Campbell, Courtney Cox, David Arquette, Jamie Kennedy, Matthew Lillard, Skeet Ulrich, the best name in acting. Skeet Ulrich? I mean, come on. So the film, if you haven't seen it, where have you been? Because, I mean, the ghost-faced killer has been in our cultural milieu for a really long time. I remember the first time that I watched it, the following Halloween was immediately a hot seller in the world of Halloween masks, right? So it's been around for a while, right? And it's a good one to be around for a while because it has staying power. And that's probably due to Jamie Kennedy's Randy's rules for horror films. So, you know, and we're going to talk about those rules for horror films too, because they have impacts for our discussion today. A lot of social psychology, a lot of gender psychology, a lot of aggression to talk about today. Yeah, it's going to be a good one. But before we jump into that, I want to remind you that if you have not seen the film, that you might want to recognize that there are spoilers ahead.
There are going to be some spoilers ahead.
Yeah, spoilers. So, this is one of my new spoiler sound effects, little sound bites. Let me know if you didn't like it or not. I'm just messing around with voice changer. So, you know, if you don't like it, let me know. I'm gonna mess around with them a little bit more. It's fun. It's kind of fun. And so join us for our discussion about Scream. My guest host today is another old friend of mine, all the way from our time at Cal State Northridge. We're talking like 10 years ago. more than 10 years ago. My guest host is Dr. Angela Bell. She's a social psychologist and earned her Ph.D. in psychology from Oklahoma State University. She's currently an assistant professor at Lafayette College in Pennsylvania. She studies stereotypes, prejudice, and how people evaluate racism in themselves and others. On social media, you can find her at
Angela C. Bell on Instagram.
Angela, welcome to the show.
Thank you. This is surreal. I'm so honored to be here. But I also, as you were reading out everything, I am flashing back to our time in Northridge. And you're always in my Facebook memories from statuses a decade ago.
Yes, a decade ago. And you and I are native Californians. So I'm happy to have a fellow Californian on to discuss the film that we're going to talk about today. But before we do that, I do want to ask you about just broadly your thoughts on film in general. And do you, and if you do, why do you use film in your teaching?
Great question. So I've been a film fan. I love movies, and I think movies are a great tool for conversation and analyzing people's behaviors and thinking about why people do what they do. And so I'm a big advocate for using film in teaching, though I don't use it as often as I would like.
That's fair.
I do use some documentaries. I'm happy to use clips, for short examples. And there are times in which I don't know if you've ever heard of this movie, The Exam.
I have not.
It's a great social psychology movie.
Okay,
so
we'll
talk about that later.
Okay.
Yeah. But so I love film. I'm a big fan. I think there's a lot to learn about psychology from movies.
Yeah, as the psychology of people, right? So, what is that? I mean, this podcast could continue on ad infinitum into the end of existence because of just how many films we could talk about with so little time. So today's film, Angela, is Scream. And I asked you for, a couple of options, and you threw a few out there. And when you said Scream, I was like, ooh. Because for most people, they don't really know that Scream was actually one of the first quote-unquote adult films. Not an actual adult film, but an adult film that I watched in the 1990s when it came out. Like, my parents let me watch it, which is crazy. It was crazy,
Me too.
right?
Yeah, I have the same exact experience. It was one of the first rated R movies I was allowed to rent at Blockbuster.
Yes. It wasn't the first rated R movie that I saw, but it was the first super gory rated R film that I saw. So what was your reasoning behind this choice?
Part of it is my similar background to you. This is a movie that has been very influential in my life. I watch it almost every year, and I feel like I find something new about it every time I watch it. It doesn't get old to me. I think as far as the podcast goes, I know you and your guests have looked at horror films a lot, and I find that to be really interesting because I think horror as a genre is a really interesting approach to analyzing human behavior and the psychology of people. So it jumped to me because I think a lot about the stereotypes that Scream hinges itself upon and sort of anchors a lot of motivations for characters. And it makes me think about my own research, and it makes me think about the messaging that people might come away from this movie.
Yes.
I'm not always sure when we're watching a satirical film, and I always hesitate with using comedy in classes,
Right.
because it might have, it can be misinterpreted
Right.
really easily. So I think that lends itself to an even more interesting conversation that we can have about Scream.
Right. And I think a lot of people do miss the comedy aspect of it and can kind of get sucked into it because Wes Craven was the horror man in the 70s and the 80s, and then he goes and makes this like farcical look at his own style of filmmaking, his own genre of filmmaking, and you can get kind of lost in that and lose out on the broader message, which I hope today in this episode that we can sort of pick apart some of those broader messages. Now, I don't anticipate anyone using this film in their classes due to the graphic nature of many of the killings. But it is something that you could potentially use clips, like you mentioned earlier, right? You can use clips of this, and we'll have a few clips here and there that I think are very illustrative of the topics that we'll bring up. Do you have any thoughts on this being a subgenre of a slasher horror flick?
No, I think it's just straight up slasher flick.
But I mean, you're talking about horror, right? And so it being specifically a slasher flick, right? So there's no like supernatural aspect to it.
Yeah. So this it is classic slasher flick. It starts within the first 5 minutes. In the opening scene, someone is killed brutally. And there are, I think I have a death count. I think maybe 8 people died in this movie.
Okay.
I have it written down somewhere.
I didn't write a body count.
Maybe we should revisit this. Anyway, yeah, it's a classic slasher movie, and the killers. Spoiler alert.
They've already been warned.
Yeah. Okay. So the killers, are stabbing each other. They're stabbing all over town. And there's only really one method to killing people. And that is stabbing and then sometimes gutting them and then hanging their bodies.
Yeah.
Which I also find to be an interesting pattern. I hadn't thought about the hangings actually until we were watching it.
I think what Wes Craven does in this film, and what I mentioned at the top of the show, is that I consider this a reimagining of the slasher flick, because prior to I think this film and others related to it, like Saw or something like that, the slasher flicks had supernatural elements. So if you think about Halloween, Michael Myers moves with great speed, and it's just like, how can he move that quickly? And it's really unexplained. And then the Jason films. Speaking of the Jason films, where they actually talk about how Jason Voorhees' mother is actually the killer in the first Friday the 13th. And then like super supernatural in Nightmare on Elm Street and Freddy Krueger, right? Dreamscape and all of that. So I think Wes Craven does a pretty good job of taking that slasher flick and reimagining it a little bit more grounded. And for our conversation today and the notes that we both took, and I noticed that we have a lot of correspondence in those notes, the notes that we have. I think it lends a little bit of reality and realism to some of the ideas that we'll talk about in this episode, right?
Yes. So yeah, we have lots to talk about. Maybe I should give you a more official answer about my reasoning behind this choice that might, expand upon what we've discussed. But I mean, I'm really excited to talk about Stereotypes and Prejudice. specifically about gender, mental illness. I mean, we can talk about potentially if scary movie cliches are a type of stereotype.
Yeah. Sure.
Or if they sort of map onto other cognitive processes like, schemas or prototype theory.
Yeah.
We can talk about, there's a lot of motivated reasoning in this movie in which people are always trying to determine who is the killer and why. And people's conclusions are always based on their own motivations.
Right.
And some people make grave mistakes, due to that directional. Yep. Due to their directional thinking.
Yep.
Also, there's just so much sexism.
Oh my God.
So much violence.
So much violence.
And so much aggression that we can go over.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So where do we begin?
Where do we begin? I think I kind of want to talk about just the aggression. Let's get the elephant in the room to get out of the room here, right? So aggression. And the reason why I have a slightly self-serving reason for starting with aggression is because I'm teaching social psych right now in an online class, and later this week we are going to have broader discussions in a live stream about aggression. And so I almost want to bring the topics that we talk about in this in this conversation into that and be like, hey, you guys see Scream? And then go from there, right? And so what I talk about, and I had to condense this discussion on aggression for this summer class because of time. But I talk about the broad things like, what's hostile versus instrumental, and then relational versus physical, and all of that too, and then the impacts of harm, and what kind of harm is in the film. So obviously we see a lot of instrumental aggression, right?
Well, I mean, the killers these are all premeditated.
Yeah.
Acts. They're very thoughtful, even in the scenes, I think, that are tongue-in-cheek, in which you see a person in a Scream costume, like, hanging out in the background. I feel like even the sort of the boogeyman who's always lurking,
right,
that's done in a jokey way. I feel like that is done in a way to make the characters like Sydney feel terrorized.
Surprise, Sydney.
Yeah, and it's specifically toward Sydney, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you go back and you're after you know who the killers are, Stu and Billy, right? And you go back to the scene where in the hallway and some D-bag is running through in the outfit and the ghost-faced killer cat mask. You have to wonder, okay, one of them put this idiot up to them, up to it, right? And to run specifically by Sydney. Not just Tatum, but specifically Sydney, right? So there's quite a bit of intent there. But the one killing that doesn't make sense to me is the principal.
I was actually thinking about him and the role that he plays.
Henry Winkler.
Henry Winkler is Principal Himbry.
Himbry, there we go.
What a name.
Yeah.
And this is actually the one death that I forget about too when I'm rewatching the movie. I'm like, oh yeah, Himbry's got to die. And I think maybe it is because he is taking such a thoughtful approach to the sort of the torture that's going on in town. Like, he's immediately shutting down, the town. There's a curfew instated. Okay. He's telling his students, "I love you," over the over the loudspeakers, on campus, and he, wants to be safe. I think maybe it's not. I personally think it might be premeditated because of the lengths that they go to sort of hang him and like show a message to the town. But it is possible that it could be just thoughtless and they were taking advantage of a situation in which he was alone.
Okay.
But I
or to get back one of the costumes.
or to get back one of the costumes. Though I'm maybe I feel like the reaction to people's to like the killings seem to be like really callous and thoughtless, and that teenagers are just going to make fun of this thing. So maybe the Wes Craven brutal teenagers can be to each other, with like buying their own masks and like running throughout, the town on their own. But yeah, I don't know.
That's interesting. It's an interesting one, right? And there's a lot of physical aggression, obviously, right? With the killings and the stabbings and the drawing and the quartering and the hanging.
Yeah.
It's just there is a lot. And you mentioned that there is some relational aggression in there. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so we do see some relational aggression, I think traditionally along gender lines in this movie, which is highly gendered throughout. And so the introduction of Courtney Cox's character, Gail Weathers, she is immediately sort of like seen as this, like, I don't know, is she a hawk or snake? There's an animal I can't even think of. She's kind of like a cat. She's always slinking around. She's an animal and a metaphor, and keep it consistent. But I think the introduction of Gail sets up relational aggression throughout the film.
Yeah.
Gail has covered Sydney's mother's murder. And so Sydney and Gail are immediately pitted against each other because of their disagreement. Right. And Tatum is sort of in the middle, not in the middle, but she eggs Sydney on to sort of escalate or like get back at Gail, or she wants to celebrate any sort of outlash that Sydney makes at Gail. And so, some relational aggression is, we're talking about like gossip predominantly,
right,
throughout the film. And Sydney and Tatum even have an exchange about gossip at one point, about how gossip is very powerful and it sometimes can be true if it's said enough times. And Tatum sort of justifies a lot of the gossip or relational aggression at one point to Sydney's dismay and disgust. And but that relational aggression does turn physical at one point when Gail confronts Sydney outside the police station, and Sydney's had enough and turns around and punches Gail.
Right in the face. Yeah, so I would, just to add to that, I would, instead of maybe making Gail an animal, which I don't
want to do that, but other people do that in the movie. That's fair. So I want...
Yeah, right. I would just say that she's very ambitious and conniving. Because it sounds like she should be a weather person, right, with the last name of Weathers. Yeah. But she works for like a Inside Edition kind of TV show, right, which is sort of tabloidy.
Yeah.
And so she has to follow these very, very, very loose leads in order to get a story. I did air quotes for listeners, to get a story. And so many people just consider her to be like conniving
She's agentic, and so she's disliked because she is so motivated to get an answer, and
which I think we could say is one of our first gender stereotypes that are explored throughout the entire film.
Yeah, she's written off as being, someone who's got a gossip, someone who's spreading lies to hurt people when her behaviors are built to protect someone. And so she's punished for it, which, so if a woman violates stereotypes, the meek, the gentle woman stereotype or belief that women should be protected because of their innocent nature, Gail really really throws all those stereotypes out the door, and then so she experiences backlash for it.
Right. That all that benevolent sexism stuff. Again, talking about that in a few. Or no, I talked about that last week, so all that stuff is on top of my head. But yeah, for sure, she is the character that sort of tries to counteract all of the like large amounts of sexism that are expressed by the characters in this movie. And she stands alone by that, and she's in all of the sequels, right?
She is in all of the sequels, yeah.
So that we'll say gender stereotype bending characterization sort of keeps her alive. Air quotes there, whatever you want to do. All right, so and as far as harm is concerned, which is part of physical aggression, harming people with either sticks and stones or words, there is a lot of lethal harm, and we should actually look up the body count on this one. I am going to scream.
I think we can just say it out loud.
Scream body count, right? Do you
Casey's boyfriend, Principal Himbry, Tatum,
yep.
The cameraman, Gail's cameraman.
Okay. Yep.
Is it
I have
only
the answer
5?
right here.
Wait, what am I missing? Wait.
Because the 2 killers do actually die. It's 8. You were right with 8.
Oh, I was. Okay.
Yes.
Who am I missing?
Maureen Prescott.
Oh my God. I actually wrote this in my notes. I said, is Maureen Prescott a dead body? As far as part of the body count. Because we don't actively see her killed, but
that's true.
She is.
That's true. So according to the site that I'm on, which is Fandom, she is counted as a body, as a death, according to Scream, because her death occurs previous to all movies, even though the flashback. You're right, and even though the flashback doesn't occur until Scream 3, so it is 8. It is a body count of 8. So you were pretty close. So there were 7. There were 7 present in the film. That's a lot of dead people.
It is. And sometimes when I'm watching slasher flicks, sometimes I do keep track in the back of my mind, because sometimes you'll watch a horror movie, and you're like, wow, only 2 people died. And I was expecting a lot more. So that is just something. And then it goes the other way, in which I watched Halloween, one of the more recent, the latest one.
Right.
And Michael Myers had killed so many people, I had lost count, and I was also exhausted. And I was like, people need to stop dying.
Want to die, Sydney? Your mother sure didn't.
People need it. All right.
In a horror movie, people need to stop dying.
So, guys, this is enough.
Yes, but
aren't you tired, Michael?
Yes, Aren't any of these killers tired? We see Stu and Billy get tired.
We do,
in this
yeah.
movie.
We do. And there's the critical scene where they're trying to kill Sydney. Although, are they really trying to kill Sydney? I'm a little iffy on that one.
Yeah.
And she overpowers whoever it is, consistently. I was just rewatching that scene where it's like, do you like to die? Do you want to die, Sydney?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, I don't. Get away from me. But you noticed something very interesting that I did not until I read your notes about the deaths. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so I'm really just in my personal life, outside of research, I'm interested in just the horror genre.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do pay attention to sort of what happens to different types of people based on characteristics with their identity, and what happens to them in the movie. And so we, in this movie specifically, we see women potentially being disproportionately or treated in a way that is like more extreme than the deaths that the men experience. So, for 5 full minutes, in 5 to 10 minutes of the opening scene, Casey is stalked as she is teased, stabbed, choked, hung, and this is really drawn out. But when her boyfriend, I think it's Steve, who's killed in front of her, the camera, we never see Steve die. We only hear it off camera, and then we get the shot of him and his guts, falling out. But that is so brief compared to what Casey experiences. And Tatum's death is also infamously gruesome, in which she is, her head is crushed, and we see the actual act, in the garage opener, in that pet door, the doggy door. And
Astrid had a funny note about that. She's like, "Why would you do that to your garage door? Why would you have a pet? Why would you have a pet door
in your garage door?" Yeah, I think this was a popular 90s thing.
I had never seen it.
I want to say.
I want to say this. They're set in Northern California, so you NorCalers are a strange bunch if that was a 90s thing.
Yeah, I think I'm just making things up, which I tend to do. When cornered for an answer, I'm trying to figure out why would there very conveniently be a doggy door in this garage instead of the actual door that opens up to the backyard. Yeah. I also had to do a double take when Tatum was killed because if she's being killed in the garage, why does it take so long for everyone to find her? Because there's a scene in which she's eventually found. But unlike houses I'm familiar with, this house is a labyrinth, and the garage is not forward facing. And so that was something I actually had to write down and be
I didn't even think of that.
How did this happen?
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah. So on the subject of the women's deaths compared to the men, Himbry is teased, but he's stabbed kind of quickly and left
and almost off camera.
Yes,
it's cut away very quickly.
A lot of it is off camera. A lot of the stabbings are, unless they're women, and then and the cameraman, his neck is slit, but I think we see that, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And then Billy, we do see the TV. He's stabbed. Not Billy. Stu is stabbed multiple times before a TV crashes on his head.
Right. Yeah.
But I would say Stu and Billy might be anomalies, or they might not follow the sort of expectations or rules that
Although I would say, and I agree with you, and I think for Stu and Billy's case, so yeah, they stab each other to make it look like they aren't the killers, right? That was their plan all along. But you don't see a lot of gushing blood, and it's underneath their clothing. Like Stu's wearing a baggy sweater, and Billy's wearing a baggy shirt. And you don't actually see their wounds like you do with the women. So that's why when I saw this, I was like, she's onto something there, because I definitely agree. You actually see the women's wounds and ways in which they are murdered. A TV falling on Stu's head, as gruesome as that could potentially be in real life, it's not in the movie.
It's played for laughs, and actually them stabbing each other is also played for laughs compared to the others. Because when Tatum, as we're talking, I'm thinking, oh, as we're seeing Tatum like sliced very slowly on the arm.
Yeah. All of the women are teased. And you can even go to I don't remember which one it is, Scream 2 or Scream 3, where Gail is being stalked, and she eventually overcomes.
Well, almost all of them. She is like a prime target. I think there's a point in which she like nearly dies in Scream 4.
Okay, that seems like it could be real. It's been a while since I've seen Scream 4, that's for sure.
I almost picked Scream 2 over Scream.
And would have been a good choice also because of the whole copycat stuff.
Yeah.
Which I like.
Yeah.
I like.
But I thought it might be too controversial to go with the sequel.
That's fair. So we're going to jump back into this discussion in just a second. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come right back. Hey, listener. Thanks for sticking around this episode. I hope you're enjoying it. Anyway, I need your help in growing this podcast's audience. In past episodes, I've asked you to share this podcast with 5 of your friends. Let's keep doing that. Share this podcast on social media, especially if you really liked an episode. Share that episode. Tell 5 of your friends or family if they have an interest in film or psychology, or even better, both. Growing the audience is our goal for the second year of programming, and so we need your help to get that done. Other ways to contribute to the podcast include tips to our PayPal, found on our website, becoming a patron at patreon.com/cinemapsychpod, rocking some sweet merch from our Spreadshirt shop, and or leaving us a rating or review on your favorite podcast service. Now back to the show. All right, Angela. So continuing our discussion on this stuff in Scream, I want to talk about the sexism. Both what we've already kind of discussed a little bit, but then like the massive amounts of rape culture impacts this film sort of plays with, and I have a scene that I wanna play for the viewers, and this scene is after Sydney and Billy accidentally, and I use air quotes because I think Billy was planning this, run into each other in the hallway. So I'm going to play that scene for the listeners, and then we'll come back to it because it's gross.
Whoa. You still think it's me?
No, I don't. It's just somebody was there.
Hey, Chris,
Billy, someone tried to kill me.
I know. The cops said I scared him away. It wasn't me, Sid.
I know. He called me again last night at Tatum's house.
You see? Couldn't have been me. I was in jail. Remember?
I'm so sorry. Please understand.
Understand what? I have a girlfriend who would rather accuse me of being a psychopathic killer than touch me.
You know that's not true.
Then what is it?
What is it? Billy, I was attacked and nearly filleted last night.
I mean, between us. You haven't been the same since your mother died.
Is your brain leaking? My mom was killed. I can't believe you're bringing this up.
I know, it's been a year.
Tomorrow. 1 year tomorrow.
I know, I think it's time you got over that. I mean, when my mom left my dad, I accepted it. It's the way it is. She's not coming back.
Your parents split up. This is not the same thing. Your mom left town. She's not lying in a coffin somewhere.
Okay. I'm sorry. It's a bad analogy. But it's just that I want my girlfriend back. Sid.
I am sorry if my traumatized life is an inconvenience to you and your perfect existence.
What? Nobody said that. Sid! Stupid.
Okay, so in that scene, Billy is like super horn dog.
I'm shocked and appalled at the scene. This was a scene in which I watched it, and I know it always felt icky, but this time I was aghast.
And if you go back after you've watched the film one time and you go back and you rewatch all of this stuff, you kind of get a sense that Billy kind of gives away his cards here, just a smidge to Sydney, and he's like, "Hey, yeah, it's been a year. You should stop grieving your mom. Let's have sex. Come on, I want my girlfriend back." Like, whoa, bro, don't be so gross.
He's pretty gross throughout, and it all seems to be contingent upon his ability to have sex. Mm-hmm. And I think this Billy, I mean, that's like Billy's main motivation. And even Sydney's mother's death is very sexualized. She is raped before she's murdered. Mm-hmm. If we think about the other victims of Billy's, it's like Casey used to date Stu.
Yeah.
And so
I would consider Casey to be Stu's victim.
Okay. Yeah. But I mean, as far as she was choked at one point, and that seems to be like consistent with like crimes of passion.
Sure.
So that's just like violence against women and potentially why. But yes, Billy's obsession with sex in this movie is, I mean, it's not really sex. He wants power. That's what he's trying to obtain. Mm-hmm. And he's trying to dominate Sydney through her sexuality.
Right.
And
I made this note as I was writing this down, but and I see that you agree that Billy is a modern day. There was no term for this back then, but he's a modern day incel.
Right. And so we say, like, involuntary celibate. My students will pretend they don't know what I'm talking about if I ask them to define it or ask them to bring it up or like explain where they've heard the term before. I don't know if they're pretending. Some might actually not know, but I think some people get shy when we talk about these subjects. And so, Billy really does try to paint himself as a victim in these interactions with Sydney, in that she's the one who's teasing him. She is the one who has all the power. He's trying to like put that on her as a reason for the situation he is in.
Right. And when an incel doesn't get their way with women, they immediately then respond by hurling insults. And you get this at the end with the creative psychopaths part, which is that he calls Sydney's mom a slut and a whore for what she did to his family. It's all her fault that she had an affair with his dad,
It's a fun game,
which
Sydney.
led
See,
his
we
mom
ask you a
to
question. If
me.
you get it wrong, booga! You die.
You get it right, you die.
You're crazy, both of you.
Actually, we prefer the term psychotic.
You'll never get away with this.
Oh no. Tell that to Cotton Weary. Wouldn't believe how easy he was to frame.
Watch a few movies, take a few notes. It was fun.
No!
Oh, where you going?
Why? Why did you kill my mother?
Why?
Why?
You hear that, Stu? I think she wants a motive. I don't really believe in motive, Sid. I mean, did Norman Bates have a motive?
No.
Did they ever really decide why Hannibal Lecter liked to eat people? Don't think so. You see, it's a lot scarier when there's no motive, Sid. We did your mom a favor, Sid. That woman was a slutbag whore. Flashed her down like she was Sharon Stone or something.
Yeah, it would put her out of her misery. Because let's face it, Sydney, your mother was no Sharon Stone.
Hmm? Is that motive enough for you?
And it's just like, well, dude, your dad had an equal share in that affair. So you're not murdering him, and so these deeply held beliefs that women have all of the sexual power, and when they don't share it, they are awful.
Yeah. And Sydney is only an extension of what happened with Maureen Prescott. And we see this theme, I think, even carried throughout Scream 2, because the killers are kept in the family. And so there's a very similar narrative in the following film with the killer's motivation for targeting Sydney and her friends.
And you made a really important point about the rape ideas in the film, and Wes Craven's prior filmography. Do you want to expand on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think Wes Craven is has an interesting history of filmmaking. And so just one of his first earliest directing stints was The Last House on the Left, which is infamous for its rape scenes, multiple rape scenes in which a woman and her friend are tortured in the woods. And then when their parents of one of the women find out, they go after the killers. And we see rape again come up in The Hills Have Eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I mean, even A Nightmare on Elm Street, if we think about the harm Freddy has done to Nancy. So when Freddy Krueger is following Nancy in her dreams and other characters throughout the entirety. Anyway, Freddy is a pedophile, and he is
clear.
very sexual, and is predatory throughout the films.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we think about the use of his tongue coming through like the phone in a scene, or his hand coming up between a woman's legs in the bathtub, these are all very. Yeah. So these are things that I'm thinking about as I'm watching Scream, and sort of what's been a blueprint for Scream, and Wes Craven's role in that as well.
Yeah, he seems to have a predilection for showing that graphically.
Yeah.
And then as well as metaphorically.
Yeah. And this might be too off topic, so if it needs to be. But Wes Craven I was reading his interviews earlier to prepare, and he had a role in making Deep Throat, but no one knows what exactly he did on the film. And he, I guess, learned a lot of his current work in working in pornographic movies. And I think that's actually a lot of film directors that came up around his time also have a similar experience. And sort of like the people have said that they've learned their best work from working in pornography.
Wow, I have never heard that before.
Yeah. And if we also think about like greater cultural and sociological movements, there is a movie, it's a documentary called American Nightmare that interviews a lot of film directors that got really popular in the 70s. And Wes Craven is one of the ones interviewed. And it's been a while since I've seen the movie, but it has a very academic take on the film, on the horror genre. And a lot of the movies or a lot of the directors that sort of rose to fame in the 70s, who sort of used a lot of these violence against women as sort of a staple for their slasher movies.
Yeah.
They said that they were inspired, if that's not even a great word, but they were really affected by the Vietnam War and images of the Vietnam War. And so I find that to be really interesting as well.
Yeah, and that actually is a great segue into Randy's rules.
Yeah.
So let's play that.
Till she went legit.
Could afford a decent pair.
What'd you say? That's why she always outsmarted the killer in the big chase scene at the end. Only virgins can do that. Don't you know the rules? What rules? You don't... Jesus Christ, you don't know the rules?
Have an aneurysm, why don't you?
If you have sex, you're gonna die. If you drink, you're gonna die. And don't ever say, I'll be right back. So the first rule, which is generally speaking the most important rule, is you can't be a virgin if you want to live. Right? Did I say that right?
You have to be a virgin.
You have to be a virgin
if you want to live. I do double negatives too all the time.
Which is an interesting rule, considering that just at the same time as Randy is giving this rule, Sydney and Billy are having sex.
That's not a mistake.
No, it's not a mistake.
I think that I think turning this rule on its head in this movie is also very 90s, I would say, as it were being more sex positive.
Yeah.
As you know, in the culture. But I think, that all of Randy's rules are immediately being thrown out. And I think maybe only one comes true. So people are sinning and they stay alive. And Stu is the only one who says, I'll be right back, and dies. Well, who else is being killed for having sex? Casey and Tatum.
Yeah, we can assume that Tatum and Stu are having sex because Stu's like always all over her.
Yeah, and she sort of is like, this is happening to me.
Yeah, and if I honestly knew those kind of people in real life, I'd be like, please stop. You don't need to do this in public all the time. All the time.
I can't even, I find myself being like, well, teens will be teens as I'm watching this. And I'm like, who am I? I'm like excusing their behavior.
Teens will be teens. You know what's the funniest thing? Just as an aside, when Brandy is talking about the rules, and he says number 2, you can't drink alcohol, and they're like, oh, they throw stuff at him, and they all have beers in their hands, and I'm like, these 20-something-year-olds
Playing 16-year-olds.
playing 16-year-olds.
Everyone
like,
is
they're
very
fine.
clearly of age.
Right. You guys are fine drinking. You're fine. I mean, how casually they do it out of, even if they're supposed to be teenagers, it's like, have a little more discretion. I don't know. It was 90s teenagers, I guess. I wasn't a teenager in the 90s, so I don't really know, but I feel like 90s teenagers were a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so although Randy does survive, and he says he is a virgin.
Yeah, he does. I was just reminded he is the one who does survive because of his virginity.
But he is drinking.
He's drinking.
Still sinning. He doesn't say, I'll be right back, though.
Mm-mm.
So it's funny that these rules have gotten to the point of put on a pedestal kind of thing. But rather than the rules being true, as far as if they're actually real from a horror standpoint, because I don't know if they might be real, but we're talking, that's what I think Scream does well with this, is it flips the horror genre on its head, which is why I think it's like a good reimagining, because of the meta look that it takes at the genre. But rather than them being put on their heads, I think it's used specifically to throw people off. Or tell you that, hey, you know what, Sydney's going to die now. Because if you are paying attention, you know that they're having sex upstairs.
Yeah, I mean that, and this movie is all about trying to get you to question your expectations of what's to come. And so I think that's really important as from a storytelling standpoint, is to sort of bring the stereotypes or the cliches to light, mm-hmm. and then try to disentangle them, try to use them sort of against people who might endorse them. Because, yeah, they violate sort of like the kernel of truth aspects, or they violate just, yeah, I don't have a good articulate thought right now about that. Help me out.
So let's take that trope idea and run with it a little bit, because you had some notes about stereotypes. Mm-hmm. And I want to play the scene where they're talking about Casey and Steve's murders at the fountain, which is such an odd conversation to have, but I guess, as you said, teenagers will be teenagers, teens being teens. They're talking about how gruesome the murders were, and
all students are encouraged to return to their homes promptly from school ground. Avoid strangers, walk in twos and threes. I will see you here tomorrow. Thank you.
Yeah, they asked me.
Hey, they asked if you like to hunt?
Yeah, they did. They asked you?
Hunt? Why would they ask you if you like to hunt?
Because their bodies were gutted. Thank you, Randy.
They didn't ask me if I like to hunt.
It's because there's no way a girl could have killed them.
That is so sexist. The killer could easily be female. Basic instinct.
That was an ice pick. Not exactly the same thing.
Yeah, Casey and Steve were completely hollowed out. And the fact is, it takes a man to do something like that.
For a man's mentality. How do you gut someone?
You take a knife, and you slit him from groin to sternum.
Hey, it's called tact, you fuck rag.
Hey, Stu, didn't you used to date Casey?
Yeah, for like 2 seconds. Before she dumped him for Steve.
I thought you dumped her for me.
I did, he's full of shit.
And are the police aware that you dated the victim?
Hey, what are you saying? That I killed her?
It would certainly improve your high school Q.
Stu was with me last night, okay?
Yeah, it was.
Was that before or after he sliced and diced?
Fuck you, nutcase. Where were you last night?
Working. Thank you.
Oh, at the video store? I thought they fired your sorry ass.
Twice.
I didn't kill anybody. Nobody said you did.
Thanks, buddy. Besides, it takes a man to do something like that.
Yo, I'm gonna gut your ass in a second, kid.
Tell me something.
Did you really put her liver in the mailbox? Because I heard that they found her liver in the mailbox next to her spleen and her pancreas.
Randy, you goon fucking trying to eat here.
Just getting mad, right? Better live her alone. Live her alone.
So you were talking about stereotypes in your notes. What stereotypes were present in this clip?
So the stereotypes that we see in this scene is the stereotypes we have around like profiling who a killer is and our expectations for like who could have done such a horrible thing. And so at one point someone says, "No way a girl could have killed him." I think that's Stu. And so no, that's actually Tatum who says that. "No way a girl could have killed him." And then
right.
Stu answers like, "It takes a man to do something like that to sort of like reaffirm potentially his position in this act." So that's something that jumped out at me too. And this is also an introduction to the conversations that happen throughout the film about mental illness and psychopathy.
Mm-hmm.
And also what men and women are capable of. So sort of the proscriptive and prescriptive nature of stereotypes versus what women and men can do and what they should do.
So on the psychopathy thing, the major, I guess, plot moving dialogue at the end is why are you doing this, Billy and Stu? And they say movies don't make psychopaths.
Movies don't make psychopaths. Movies make psychopaths more creative. And I remember that's Billy. Billy is saying that, when he's found, when the police find him nearly dead, he'll say that like he, actually don't remember what he says. I remember what Stu says, which like it's peer pressure. But they're both playing up to the idea that it's the media that influenced them if they were ever, questioned. And so, the stereotype, I guess it goes back to like sort of the nature nurture, like issue too of like who's a killer and why. In my freshman year of college, I think it was, I took a biopsych and we had to watch The Bad Seed, which is a movie that came out in the 1950s. Great movie.
And I'm going to tell you, it's awful. No.
I like that movie.
And it's about a girl who is a real, I'll tell you what. And she apparently lives in a loving household, right? And so
she's just evil.
She's just evil,
born
right? Born evil. And we had to analyze that film, and now you know why I do the things that I do in my teaching.
Yeah.
We had to analyze that film, and it's just, it was just like that it's a very strongly worded nature debate, but really there's a lot of things that happen in Billy's life that interact with his potentially, I mean, we don't get a lot of information about this, but his potentially psychopathic nature, which is, one could say, the catalyst that his mom left. The mom was his grounding factor, and when she left, he was just like, all right, I'm unhinged now. And that's a nurture thing. So
Yes. And I mean, he also uses that just like he's a victim of circumstance in all of this as well, so that is the nurture side of it as well.
Mm-hmm. Victim of circumstance, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, he says that, it's everyone else's fault and not his. And then you have to wonder, what the hell is Stu doing?
I question that. I do wonder what Stu gets out of this relationship with Billy and what he might get out of killing people or being part of sort of like putting his own like life on the line for Billy's motivations.
Yeah.
But we also see like I think the driving narrative throughout this movie is that these kids, they're teens, they're so wrapped up in popular culture and they are internalizing and soaking up media like a sponge that like implicitly is this like thread that they are products of their society. And Stu might just be highly impressionable. He might get some sort of, maybe endorsement or celebration from being Billy's partner. But I don't know. What do you think?
I actually was coming at it from the nature side of it. I actually think Stu is more psychopathic than Billy.
Because of the lack of motivation or
because of the lack of clear declared motivation within the film, because there's no other reason. The way that I characterize it, or the way that I think about it, is that you learn that Casey broke up with Stu to be with Steve. And then Tatum's like, I thought you broke up with her to be with me, blah blah blah. And it's just like, well, no, that hurt his man's pride, right? And so he can't let that go. And so he has to both kill Casey and Steve, and maybe he was actually thinking about that. And then Billy was like, hey man, I did this last year. I raped and murdered Sydney's mom. You want to go halvesies with me?
Did they work together?
It's unclear whether or not they raped and killed Maureen Prescott
together,
I mean,
or alone, or
right.
Billy alone.
Billy alone. Billy probably did it. Probably Stu was a part of it, based on some of the dialogue, but it's unclear.
Yeah.
And so, or maybe Stu helped him, and he's like, I just got a taste of this rush, and so now I'm just going to participate in this rush.
He does get
something to strike off my list now.
Yeah, he does get sort of like increasingly, I don't know, energetic and erratic, I think, throughout the film. Like he's always has like a big personality, but he's just he moves with his whole body. Like every expression like goes, to the tips of his toes and fingers. And I was actually trying to keep track of like who would be the killer in the scene. Would it be Billy or would it be Stu? And I think Stu is the killer in most of the scenes.
Okay. And it would work. Yeah, I agree.
Like the one who's doing the actual stabbing. Who's on the phone, I think, is Billy most of the time.
Okay.
That's my argument.
I think they switch. I think they switch off a little bit, but definitely Stu is the one that's doing the chasing and the bombastic kind of movements when the Ghostface killer is on camera. And that tracks with like how they tried to play it off. So when Billy comes in to rescue Sydney when she's first attacked, right? He doesn't have to take off. Like he doesn't look like he's taken off the costume kit and whatever. And then the second one where he's fake stabbed by Stu. Obviously, Stu is the one in the costume at that point. But I think Stu just stays in the costume then.
Yeah.
To make it.
The one time I can think of Billy as the killer would be as the one who kills Tatum. Because Stu is watching TV with the party.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but when it comes to, as soon as Billy is like fake stabbed, it is Stu running around the yard, with getting Sydney in the attic and chasing her around the car.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's fun to go back and do that. And you can do that with all of the Screams, is you can kind of go back and rewatch and figure out who's who. It's a good cognitive task, actually. If I bring it back to psychology, it's a good attention tracking task. Like, instead of giving
the gorilla
you
on the screen.
Yeah, instead of giving you a classic task, I'm just gonna have you watch the Scream films. Can you pay attention? It's the queen in the middle, kind of the 3-card game where you have to catch the queen. It's like, can you figure out who the killer is in this moment? 1, 2, 3, go. Well, I want to thank Angela Bell for joining me to discuss Scream. While saying goodbye, Angela, is there anything you'd like to plug? Please use this as I know you did your Instagram at the top, but where can folks find out about your work? I heard that you were recently in a publication talking about recent events.
Oh, yeah. So I had 2 interviews recently, and one is with Forbes.com. The title of the article is "You're More Racist Than You Think." How
I will link these.
Great. And then a CNN article called "Am I Racist? You May Not Like the Answer." And so I talk a little bit about my own research, as well as research that has influenced me about how people think about race and racism. And one day I will have a website that has a beautiful, clean URL. But for now, you can find me on Instagram, Angela C. Bell, which I try to use to track my productivity, but it's getting increasingly difficult.
That's good.
In
I like it.
Pandemic. So, but Angela C. Bell, or you can look me up through Lafayette College's website in the psychology department. You can find more information about me and what I teach there.
I will link the viewers to that as well in the show notes. Well, friends, it's been a Scream. Thanks for listening, and Angela, again, thank you for joining us to have a Scream. Until the next episode, thanks for listening.